Okay, good morning, at least on the West Coast where I am. Good afternoon to Alina Hernandez, who's coming to us from Italy, and Dr. Peter Litchfield, who I believe is in Arizona, right?
No, I'm in New Mexico,
New
Santa Fe.
Mexico. That's right, Santa Fe.
Mhm.
Well, thank you both for joining me today. It is, of course, the World Health Organization's World Mental Health Day. And so it's a thrill to have both of you here today to share a conversation, really just impromptu conversation about this day. What does it mean to have World Mental Health Day? What does it mean to have it today in our current environment? And each of you has a unique niche. We're all part of the Global Wellness Institute, and Peter and I are co-chairs of the Breathe Initiative. And Alina is co-chair of the Mental Wellness Initiative, as well as the First 1,000 Days Wellness Initiative. And so I want to briefly introduce you both and then just start off again by having you sort of talk about what this day means to you. So, Dr. Litchfield, we'll start with you. You have a PhD in psychology and you're a renowned breath specialist, behavioral breath specialist. And your resume is a million miles long. So I'll leave it at that, but you can supplement with any other details. And then why don't you introduce, sort of a little bit of what today means to you and what you want people to think about today?
All right. Just a little bit more about my background. My PhD is actually in experimental psychology, which I earned back in 1972. And I was a professor there at California Polytechnic State University for 11 years, during which time I went on sabbatical and I got back in 1976, got very involved in the field of behavioral medicine, behavioral pharmacology, which is where I come from. I went from the experimental to the more applied side of things, where I've been ever since. I became very interested in breathing as a psychologist, not because I was interested in things like relaxation, meditation, or yoga, or those kinds of things, but I became interested in it because I learned that the number of people who are suffering the consequences of breathing habits is absolutely extraordinary. When you look at statistics, like 60% of the ambulance runs in the larger cities of the United States are a function of people breathing dysfunctionally. That is, people who have learned dysfunctional habits, is amazing. 60% of the ambulance runs, and that basically represents the tip of this immense iceberg of breathing habits have a profound impact on people. And that really got me started. That was amazing to me. So I decided to take my background in behavioral medicine and in what we call behavioral physiology, applied psychophysiology, and that kind of thing, and then bring it to uh, breathing, because almost no one had really talked about breathing in psychological terms. It was always something people manipulated. They manipulated their breath to achieve some kind of objective. When in reality, breathing is part of who we are from a psychological perspective. So I got very involved in that because that was really the basis for the statistics that I had come across. That's how I really got involved in this.
Thank you. Yeah, it's fascinating. And for me, as you know, I came at breath from the completely opposite angle, which was through yoga. But it was the way that I began to realize the power of breath for mindset control and helping me control my emotions and feel my best and think my best. And so that's why I find what you do so interesting, because it's a very different angle. But I feel like breath and mindset are obviously a huge piece of the puzzle for mental wellness. So
Well, one thing I'd like to add to this, and that is that for me, breathing was an example of the psychology. This is the way I think of it: of the psychology of physiology. I think of physiology as a learning system, that it is a psychological system, right down to the cellular level. That is, it learns, it it collects data and uses data, and there's motivation involved in whatever it does, and it changes how it operates based on the outcome of what it does. This is really looking at physiology from the standpoint of its being perhaps the life being in essence a physiological an intelligent physiological system, that consciousness is embedded in it from the very start. And this is just an example. Breathing is a way to understand how physiology is really psychological in nature.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So fascinating. And Alina, why don't you chime in on a little bit? I also know you are a health and wellness coach, Mayo Clinic trained. And so I know you know a lot about behavior and mental health and mindset as well. So welcome. Wait, are you muted?
I
No.
was, because I have doggies in the background.
It's okay these days. It's fine.
So thank you, Sandy, for inviting me today and to be in this conversation with you and Peter. As you mentioned, I co-chair the Mental Wellness Initiative of the Global Wellness Institute together with Professor Jerry Boddicker. And very similar to you, Sandy, I came at this not from the science originally, although I did become very involved in the science later on and was intrigued by it. I came into the area of mental wellness and to this position as the co-chair of the initiative through something called psychological stage development theory. And the biggest psychological stage development theorist is Maslow. Everybody knows about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And because of the knowledge that I have in this field, and I've written about it, Professor Boddicker invited me to be part of the initiative because, to Peter's point, we are living systems. And we respond according to what we have, learned, what we've experienced. So fast forward, I became involved with the initiative when it was first created. So we've been at this now for over 5.5, 6 years. And together with my colleagues in the initiative and led and edited by Professor Boddicker, Jerry Boddicker, we wrote probably a seminal paper now in the industry, a white paper that really was the evidence-based foundation of mental wellness, pathways, evidence, and horizon. It's 120 pages of evidence of all the different modalities that actually contribute to our mental wellness. And you mentioned at the beginning of the call, what does mental wellness mean to me? And mental wellness means to me, and what we, through the work of the initiative, is that mental wellness is not simply to say that we have the absence of illness or pathology. That is to say, we as human beings, and Maslow wrote about this extensively, as well as many other stage development theories, we were engineered to thrive. And if we don't have the tools at our disposal, and we don't even know that we have these tools at our disposal, how are we going to do that? How are we going to thrive? And so I am really just passionate about supporting individuals to find the right pathway that works for them so they can actually thrive, so they can continuously strive towards that horizon in their mental health and wellness, so that we get to baseline, and where there, even if there is a pathology, we know that those two things are not linked. And so that's what mental wellness means to me, is supporting the human capacity to thrive.
Beautiful. So well said. Thank you. And Dr. Litchfield, what advice can we give people? Obviously, we just have a short conversation today. I don't want to go too deep into science, but I want people to feel inspired by this conversation and leave with some tangible tools from both of you that they could maybe think about today and then start to implement in their daily routine. So, Peter, maybe you can talk about how would someone know if their breath is dysfunctional?
Okay, the way that we think of breathing as being dysfunctional or not has to do with its outcome. That is, many people think that there's a certain way you need to breathe, and if you're breathing that way, that's good. and helpful. And if you breathe another way, that it's not good. Like breathing slowly is good, breathing diaphragmatically is good. When we look at dysfunctional breathing behavior, you look at breathing as behavior rather than just a physiological process, then it's really about the consequences of that behavior. And one of the many consequences, obviously, is respiration,
Mhm.
that you achieve good respiration. And people don't understand that breathing serves us in a lot of ways, like talking, for example. It's not just, for getting oxygen to where it needs to be. In fact, breathing actually regulates the acid-base balance of your body, literally from breath to breath. And when that goes out of whack, because you take control of that breathing and you take the control away from the fundamental reflexes that really need to be allowed to do what they know how to do, and you get in the way of it, then you compromise respiration. And when you compromise respiration, you compromise physiology radically, and you have no idea you're doing it. And very often, people believe what they're doing is good. They've labeled it as good. They've learned that, breathing this way or that way, that is good, without really understanding how it connects to the respiratory process. So one thing people can learn is essentially to bring about that connection, because very often we become disconnected that way. Well, how do you do it? I mean, there are instruments you can use to measure it. But the first thing that's involved, one thing I can really recommend, this is simplistic because it's more than this, but it's about allowing breath. And this really is kind of a metaphor for other things in life, rather than trying to control everything and make everything the way you want it. Is you set a stage for yourself in your life, and you get on the stage, and then you essentially you're intuitive and spontaneous from there. The stage is what allows you then to interact with people that might be more constructive than being on some other kind of a stage. So the awareness of breath is so important in that, where you learn to allow it. You get on the right stage, you allow that breath to occur, you allow those mechanisms to work. And one of the first steps is really to know how to allow the breath. Most people, when they focus on their breath, they immediately try to control it. Again, a metaphor for life, always trying to control everything. They try to control the breath, and they get into trouble very quickly as a result. So in the awareness process, you focus on doing and not doing, so you can learn the difference.
Mhm.
Okay. And if respiration gets out of whack because you're not allowing it, you'll get symptoms. Like if you get a little bit of dizziness, you're going to do public speaking, like maybe you're going to be on this discussion today, and you get anxious, and you take control of the situation by breath holding. Okay. Now, there's nothing wrong with breath holding. It's that it's really a symptom of taking control. And when you take control, then you take away the intelligence of the system that knows how to operate the respiratory process. It knows how to do it. And you're not allowing it. You don't realize you're not allowing it. And you get dizzy, and then you get dizzy in that situation. Why do you get dizzy when you start to control and take more breath? Is because you essentially remove carbon dioxide from the system, too much of it, so that you'll get constriction of the blood vessels in the brain. And when that happens, then you get hypoxia, you get an oxygen deficit, you get a glucose deficit, and now you can't function properly. You can't focus. You can't remember. You get what we call disinhibition, where you get the triggering of emotions. Depending on who you are, different emotions may be triggered. So now you get emotional. You can't focus. You don't have enough oxygen, and so on. And this is all coming about because you're trying to control.
Mhm.
And again, that's a metaphor in psychology and mental health for how we get into trouble. Okay. And so now, if you can learn to observe it, so you can know the difference between essentially taking control and not, and generalize that to other parts of your life, and then allow that to happen, you'll notice that those symptoms will start to go away, like that dizziness and so on, and all kinds of other symptoms will start to go away, not because you're relaxing in this case, but because you're giving control, you're turning the control over to the wizard who knows how to breathe, those basic reflexes in the system. And in so doing, you may find yourself coming back into yourself. You're available. You're not dissociating anymore. You're associating rather than dissociating, so that you're then present for your audience. Again, that's a metaphor in life. You're present for the audience. Those are the people around you. those are the people you're connecting with. It's not really public speaking. That's just the specific example. All of it is a metaphor. Okay, so that's where you might start with breathing.
Thank you. Such a powerful metaphor for especially coming out of pandemic and the feeling of a continuous feeling of uncertainty. So we all wanted to feel a little bit more in control of many parts of our lives. And so I think that will really help. Your example will be so helpful to people to see that the connection of breath, brain, everything, taking control. It's all related. And I'm sure, Alina, now you have something to add to that about taking control. And as a coach, how do you advise your clients when it feels good to take agency of, I feel like I can control something, yet what a powerful example Peter just gave about trying to let go and let our human body use its power, its superpower that we have in so many of our vital systems, not only the respiratory system, but cognition and everything else.
Yeah, I mean, I love this idea that what Peter's talking about is like all of these physiological functions are just a mirror to actually what happens and can happen behaviorally, right, in the world. And, you know, you talk about coming out of this 2.5 year period of the pandemic and people wanting to take control. And there's a flip side to that, because as Peter was making the analogy with breath, if you want to take too much control too soon, it can actually backfire on you. It can backfire on you also in terms of change. It could also backfire in terms of, there's something to be said when people talk about this flow state. Yeah. And I think that that's a little bit, in a way, what Peter is talking about. And more importantly, with trying to take control, we lose a sense of peace. Because if it doesn't work out, then you become even more discombobulated and you become even more anxious, which is the opposite of peacefulness, which is the opposite of relaxation, which is the opposite of a flow state. And so I think if we take that piece, you know, we talked about it. One of the first trend that we put out in 2022 was actually finding peace through self-care. Breath work is a huge part of self-care. And the question is, how do you maximize that really powerful tool that we have that is organic within our behavior? Where do you find that middle ground and that piece of not trying to control it so much, because then it actually has the opposite effect? And I think that there's that, we can look at that and say, it is very much of trying to find that peace within. And that's an ultimate sense of self-care. And that's allowing, like breath is life, for it to come through us in the most relaxed and natural way possible with that awareness.
I think the engineering of things comes into play to create platforms that we can go onto to then, stage some part of our lives, which is flowing and intuitive and unpredictable, creative, exciting. Again, we don't necessarily have to think about relaxation, but what we think about is being positive, that is being available, being present. So you can be very sympathetically aroused. There can be a lot of input, or it can be very quiet. Either one can be peaceful in the sense that it's positive, that you're moving forward, that you're available to new things that might come along that you can be creative with. But again, that the uh, intellectual part of it, or the control part of it, has to do with this designing the stage and building the stage, and then going on to it and being alive there. You're not walking across the floor, moving each muscle. You just walk. You don't, learn how to move each muscle. You just do it. Okay. So life is something you just do. But you need to have a stage in which to do it. And that I think is really so fundamental.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And self-awareness is a big, I find that today so many people are externally focused all the time that it's really difficult for people to build a self-awareness and to understand that so much happens in our lives. All of our experience in life happens by the way we interpret it internally. Brandon Howard just typed in a comment on LinkedIn that said, reality is a reflection of our collective internal activity. Do you, either one of you want to comment on that? Thank you, Brandon. That's true.
You know, for me, in terms of my work in psychological stage development theory, and I'm going to go back to the word that Peter used at the beginning as a system. So we are value systems that are interacting at the same time. And these systems really fall into place through our life experience and how we respond to what happens to us. Do we have the capacity to upstretch and solve problems in a different way than we did before? And if we do, we have just had created the ability or tapped into the ability that we have to solve problems in a new mindset, in a different way of thinking about things. And or we regress and we go to downstretch, but we don't really want to regress, because obviously if you've never solved the problem before, it means obviously however it was that you were doing, it wasn't working. So we have to try something new. And in that trying something new is actually something we've already happened. It's already happened. What we're really doing is to navigate that new space of change, making sense of that which we already are experiencing, but really putting a kind of, yeah, it's like wearing a new coat or something new. You have to kind of make sure it fits properly, and then you walk in it and you move it into it. And mindset is the same thing. And it's a dynamic process. And so, yeah, I think that is part of the life journey.
I think that also that what came up a little bit earlier, or just before Alina started talking there, is internal versus external. Is that a lot of people essentially look to themselves as being victims, and in so doing, they're looking for something to pin the blame on about what their lives are about, and they're not focused very internally. Where the meaning really resides. The meaning isn't out here. The meaning is inside of us, and that's why even on this physiological level, and I started talking about originally, that for me physiology operates based on the meaning of what it does. My background is as a scientist, and science is about predicting, and you can't predict what physiology is going to do very well unless you can address the psychology of what it is. That is the meaning that is embedded in that physiology. People talk about, oh, that's, physiology does this for survival. It's all about survival. But what is survival unless there's meaning? Survival is irrelevant unless there's meaning. So there's meaning embedded in that, and that's inside. And we need to address that. The outside, it has to do with how we can essentially create time and space as a place. It's deterministic out there. I was very involved for a long time in existential philosophy. I got into psychology through animal behavior on the one hand, but I came in on the other hand through existential thinking and about meaning and that kind of thing, and how we create meaning as beings and how meaning is embedded in everything. And so I think, understanding that we have a lot to say about who we are, even very fundamentally physiologically, is where we need to focus. Is what can we do rather than focus on how we're being manipulated, to focus on what we can create, where we can go, what we can make happen as individuals in terms of developing ourselves through our experience, bringing our consciousness. Alina was talking about Maslow and so on. Ultimately, it's up bringing our consciousness to a certain place. We keep moving through what that's all about, exploring and discovering, and not operating so much out of fear, but out of our willingness to go forward and to be present for what's available to us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I can add to that piece, that what Peter just said is very important, and it's really about building self-efficacy. So in evidence-based coaching practice, particularly the one that Mayo teaches, the evidence shows that one has to build self-efficacy if one is to change, and you don't build it from external referencing. You build it from internal referencing. So my small short-term wins will help me understand behaviorally, it's automated. The behavior is automated, that I can actually do it. And chances are that if I have those small little wins every day, after a period of time, a continuous so-called short-term wins gets me to a place where I start really believing in myself. And the stronger, the higher my self-efficacy, the more likelihood I will be successful in whatever the change is, the behavioral change, the positive behavioral change.
Yeah. And so if somebody right now is rating very low on the self-efficacy scale, and like with the example you used, they feel very uncomfortable in their jacket or in their skin right now, what advice do you both have for changes to help people, people who've had that same negative internal dialogue for so long that they don't even realize maybe that they can change that physiologically, right? Your brain can rewire a new internal dialogue. So will you both talk about, if somebody's listening to this and they're really struggling, they are still living in from a fear-based perspective or uncertainty and in negative internal dialogue, what might be a good first step today for somebody to try to internally change their chaos or internal energy?
Well, I have a general comment, first of all, and what a lot of people focus on is putting out fires,
Mm-hmm.
little fires, big fires, and then life becomes all about fire. It becomes all about avoiding things, avoiding people, avoiding places, avoiding ideas, and so on. So I think what's fundamental is one shift that you can make is to start focusing on what are the good things that are happening at this moment, and to remember that these can be very, very small things. So much of the time people are looking for these very big things in their lives that aren't happening. Well, this is true of most of us, really, in many ways. You can essentially configure or conceptualize what's going on in a way that doesn't look very good. But then you can configure it in other ways with all the prospects, all the possibilities that are out there, even if they're just very small things about, like, maybe somebody you're going to meet who's going to be interesting. You could have a positive conversation with someone. That is a tremendously reinforcing thing, where I meet someone and I have a positive conversation. Maybe it's just for 10 minutes, but somehow I connected with that person. I don't know why. Somehow I just really felt good. I felt that that person understood something about me, or I understood something about them, and I walk away from it. And that is a highly motivating kind of an experience, to know that that is a very important part of life, that it's there, that it's available, that it happens, and it could happen again. And so looking for those little positive things, and then reinforcing yourself, giving yourself positive feedback. In that situation, I met that person and it worked. It was 5 minutes, it was 10 minutes, but my God, it worked. That's fantastic. So you feel good about yourself because of that. And you do little things, like you do something to help someone in a grocery store, whatever it is, some little thing you did, then you feel much better about yourself. And try to focus on the positive things. You collect them. You become a collector of these positive things, and they start to drive you, rather than all this avoidance. All this is bad. That's not working. This is no good. This person's threatening. Everything's bad at work. No one likes me over here. You're going to be a basket case if that's the way you're going to orient. So you can build a habit, and it works, because when you start to think differently and it works and you feel better, you know what? You're going to do it more often. It's
So
just basic behavioral science. You'll do it more often because it works.
I love it.
Positive reinforcement works better than what we call negative reinforcement, which is the avoidance of things that are troubling to you. Step out into the world, take a chance on something that looks positive rather than saying to yourself, oh my God, I might get into trouble if I do that. Get out there and give it a try. If you get positive feedback, that'll have a huge impact on you.
Yes, the human connection and helping people and coming from a place of gratitude. I love that advice because it's something that everybody can do right now, is just immediately look for something they're grateful for, find the beauty in something small, a small moment. There's always an opportunity to help someone out. Like you said, at the grocery store or just on a walk down the sidewalk, there's always an opportunity to smile or say hello. And it's those teeny tiny things that can really be big monumental gestures to someone in need. So thank you, Peter. That was really powerful. Alina?
Well, I love this whole conversation because we can synthesize all of this. I mean, a lot of what Peter said, I recognize in the coaching that I've learned. And I also want to say that one of the key pieces that we were taught at Mayo is that in order for someone to be ready to change, first of all, it's like anything else. They have to really be engaged. In other words, I cannot make anybody be engaged. The other piece to that is if somebody's genuinely going through one thing is cycling in this, negativity and not wanting to try anything new. The other piece is that some people are not able physiologically because there's a great pathology or there's something major there that is really blocking the capacity to go beyond their state of negativity. And Susan Brown, I think Brown is her last name, from Harvard, always says that it's important to acknowledge something that happens to us that is negative, but not personalize it. So in other words, I wouldn't say I am sad. I would say I am feeling sad. It's a question of languaging. To contextualize it, it's very important. If not, then we create a self-fulfilling prophecy. We kind of tell ourselves this, we kind of keep in this negative feedback loop, to what Peter was saying at the beginning. And at the same time, if that is not an issue, is to recognize and to ask myself, what is it that I really love? What is it that I love to do? What is it that makes me want to get up in the morning? Because everybody has that. Unless you're in a major pathology, everybody has this capability. It may not be for some people to go and feel grateful. I may not be feeling grateful today about anything. And that's absolutely okay, because to force someone to feel grateful when they are in this type of a state is counterproductive. It's actually negative. It's a form of toxicity in a way. But if we acknowledge today, in this moment, I feel sad, it is not, an enduring statement about my whole life. It is a statement about today. Then or this moment, then if I think about, to what also Peter said, there is something that we've all had an experience in our lives where we had a positive experience, and there's a reason why. If we're able to tap into that why, it takes us on a path of, where can I go find that again? You have to find your mojo. And, again, there are bazillions of different pathways to find mental wellness. Not all of them are right for every individual. Some people really get into breath work. Other people like a certain other type of mindfulness practice. But the point is, you will only do it if you really like it. If it's something that really turns you on. If it's something that doesn't, it ain't going to happen, because it's friction. And then you try and create little things in your life. So if I'm a smoker and I know I have a packet of cigarettes in the glove compartment, and every morning when I go to the office, I know it's there, and I take that cigarette because it's handy. It's right there. The first thing I need to do is get rid of the cigarette in the glove compartment. On my commute, I'm not going to stop at the store to get cigarettes, because you create friction. If you don't want to eat the cookies, don't have the cookies in your house, because chances are you're not going to get out the door and walk out the door at 3:00 in the morning to buy the cookies. So the more these type of things that you create, make positive behavioral things in your life easy to access. Make them in the way that they become engaging. We need to be engaged. Then we can experiment in what works and doesn't work for us. Then we're ready to envision a new life. And then slowly we begin this point of experimentation whereby every day we do something and we don't judge ourselves whether we were successful or we weren't. We tap into that what do I love? And then the more you do it and it becomes, as Peter said, habituated, well, after you look back and you realize, wow, I actually did it. Short-term wins get you to long-term gains at a very practical level.
One thing
Thank
I'd
you.
like to add to what Alina is saying about engagement and so on, you know, we create meaning. A lot of people, they just look around to see if they can find it. And, it's like years ago, we used to take the strong inventory to find out what we were interested in. And it always occurred to me, well, what if you're not, I'm talking about high school. What if you're not interested in something? A lot of people look around, they don't know what they want to do. They don't have any idea what they're interested in. And somehow they think that it's buried in there and they're going to find it somewhere. Well, to a very great extent, it's created. And it's created through engagement. It's created by making a choice, by spending energy. And as you get involved in it, you have the potential of becoming fascinated by it. But until you get into it and make a choice and discipline yourself, chances are it won't develop. So one of the things we do in our work, it's all about preference. Like if someone's going to change their breathing, something very specific, they have a bad breathing habit, they're going to switch to something else. It has to be something that's works, that's positive, that's reinforcing, or they're never going to do it. You'll never do it. Okay, but you can essentially change it so that you do want to do it because it becomes a positive thing rather than a negative thing. I remember I'm going to England this afternoon, actually, and I'm going to a two-star restaurant on Friday that I've been two-star Michelin restaurant I've been to before, and I hate liver. I love food, but liver is something I just can't stand. Okay. And I was at that restaurant and about 3 years ago with my partner, Sandra, and different Sandra than the one here.
Yeah.
and I there was a liver, it was an appetizer, it was a liver dish. And so Sandra said, well, I want you to try it and everything. I said, oh, okay, I'll try it. And you know what? It turned out that it was the best food I ever put in my mouth for Sandra and myself. It was the best thing I've ever eaten ever in my entire life.
Wow.
Because it was the way it was put together with the ingredients that were there. A very famous woman chef. Some people say she's one of the top chef in the world. The way she put it together and the whole context of it changed everything.
Mm.
Rather than something I really disliked, it was the best thing I ever tasted in my whole life.
I love your enthusiasm.
I stepped forward.
Yes.
Okay, I'll do this. And it turned out to be a whole different reality.
That's a delicious
So
example of being open-minded. And
again, there's your metaphor. Delicious, right?
exactly. Thank you. Maybe I'll try it if I see it on the menu again, because I also have bad
Well, it's called
memories.
La Dame de Pique in the restaurant in
Okay,
London,
put that on my
in the
to-do
Four
list.
Seasons Hotel.
Wow. Okay, so I want to end with one last thing, sort of going back to the beginning of the conversation where Peter mentioned stress. And a lot of people, this is what 90% of the doctor's visits are, or the ambulance rides, or whatever, involve stress. And so I'd like to leave by each of you talking about something that people can do today to try to either become more self-aware of their stress, because what I've found in my breath workshops is that people don't even understand or notice those physical manifestations of their stress a lot. And so, what people can do to either become more self aware of how they hold or manifest stress, and maybe a tool to help them manage stress better, that's very accessible and as simple as maybe getting outside and taking a walk in nature. It doesn't have to be too complicated. But, and then any other ending advice that you want to leave everyone with? And also, yeah, that's it. Alina?
So, I mean, you just said it for me, and I think for a lot of people, one of the most democratic and easy things to do is to walk outside the door, the law of 2 feet. And walking, for many reasons that I'm not going to elucidate on, is incredibly useful as a stress buster. If you're having a stressful time in a relationship, if you're having a stressful time in a situation, psychologists, therapists talk about, you never go into it. You take that moment to literally walk away, leave your environment, and in the process, especially if you have access to some form of nature, even if you're in an urban environment, to go to a park, it's a very easy way. And you're moving, which is also has a lot of other, it has a big, huge payoff. I think that, for me, one of the pieces that and recognizing that you may also recognize symptoms like headaches for a lot of people. Some people get triggered and they stress eat. I mean, there are a lot of things that we can become self-aware about, recognizing the stress and how we manage that stress. I think in moving forward, we talked a little bit about, at the very beginning of the conversation, we talked about the state of, the definition of mental wellness. And I think you may have mentioned something about what is it going to be like in the future? Where are we going with this? And I just like to leave as a kind of a commentary, the notion of thinking about where are we going? And I think it was Peter who mentioned all these platforms that are available, and making it more accessible for people to have mental wellness and health services more readily available. And I think that involves a conversation that is really front and center about Web 3.0. And how are we going to begin to start thinking about, as mental wellness advocates and people in the space, how we engage in the environments of virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality? Because the evidence is out there that says it can be extremely helpful. And yet, how is it that we become aware of certain risk, like in gamification, that we inform ourselves so that we become self-aware and we could become knowledgeable about both the positive attributes of engaging in these virtual environments, as well as some of the challenges. And so I guess I just want to leave it in that space, because in terms of stress, there are many things that are now in this, let's say, metaverse space to deal with stress, and they're very readily accessible.
Thank you. Peter?
Okay, well, Alina made reference to stress and technology. And I'll just go with her on those things. This is first to mention stress. One of the things that people really don't understand or focus on, it's not just about stress, how stress is affecting me, but it's how I have learned to respond to the stress that will create a lot of the problems that we blame on stress. So if we learn to change our behaviors in relationship to a challenge, then a lot of the things that normally we attribute to stress, we no longer do that. We're no longer a victim of stress, but we understand it's something that we've learned that's part of the problem. And a good example of it is in the breathing, since that's where Sandy and I are coming from here today, is that someone, when they start to get challenged somehow, try to take control, obviously, because they feel overwhelmed. And one of the things they do is they try to take charge of the breathing. And when they do take charge of that breathing, and the breathing becomes no longer synchronized with respiration, and they start to overventilate because that feels good to take more oxygen. Of course, that's not what's happening. And what will happen is you can get constriction of the vasculature in the brain, which then brings on a headache because you're not getting enough oxygen because of the big breaths you're taking. You're not getting enough oxygen, the contrary to what you might think. You're not getting enough blood sugar, and you can develop a headache very quickly. And now you blame the stress, the headache, on the stress. I have a headache because of the stress. Really, that stress is coming from the behavior you've learned to deal with that challenge. That is a metaphor again, okay? And how we do certain things to confront our challenge, and then we create all kinds of problems around it that we've created, and then blame it on those things that we were originally confronting. So that's one thing. Second thing, around technology, I think technology, as Alina was alluding to or saying directly, how important it can be. I mean, look what we're doing here today in this technology. We've been working with people who have serious habits on, on Zoom and other platforms way before Zoom. We've been doing this. And this platform is a fantastic opportunity, because one of the things that happens is that all the territorial cues that we normally have when we sit around with each other, where we're shy, people are afraid to speak, to come forward, all the, am I sitting too close, too far away? How am I moving my eyes? All these details and so on. You get into this environment, people let go of that. A lot of the triggering of that territoriality is gone, and people come forward, and they're more likely to. I've found, I've been doing this for 15 years on the internet. They really relate to each other much more quickly in most cases, and really share intimate things, really get involved. It's a real opportunity for people to get to know each other. I've gotten to know people all over the world. And I go out and I visit them after a few years of knowing them, and they're already close friends. I think we can do the same thing, around people who are isolated. They're by themselves. They aren't connected. They don't have a conversation with anyone during the day. They're really, really locked away somewhere. They feel like they're suffocating. So again, this is an analogy, metaphor. It's an opportunity to really get out there. So the metaverse is really, in a way, the way to get out there and to interact with the people and the world out there. And in that process, learn about yourself. It's an incredible opportunity for all these people who are just isolated. Then there's the downside where all the crazies come together on the internet and create some conspiratory theory, and that runs rampant around the world. That's the downside of it.
So true. Well, thank you both so much for the human connection, the conversation. You both inspire me so much. And on behalf of sort of the Global Wellness Institute and our Breathe Initiative and your Mental Wellness Initiative, Alina, this is why we do this, is to try to have bigger conversations with more people and share insights and advice that we learn. And also, now that we need to unlearn some things, is what I'm hearing from both of you today too. So it gives me a lot to ponder and think about today. And I hope that anybody that listens, this recording stays up. So my hope is that anybody that listens at their leisure at a later time will also, I'm sure, learn something from both of you. And you're so full of sage advice and wisdom and just the genuine desire to help people. And I'm one of those people. So thank you so much. And if you want to share with anybody how they can reach out to you, let's end on that note. Alina?
You can reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn and certainly through the GWI. And I also want to say thank you, Sandy. Always, you're an incredible cross-pollinator and a masterful connector. And thank you again for inviting me to be with you and Peter on this call. It's always great to be in the space with you. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Peter?
Yes, well, I want to thank you so much also. I really do appreciate the opportunity to come here. I can be reached easily because my email is so simple. My initials PL and then @ and then it's very simple. There's 2 letters, B as in Bravo, P as in Papa, bp.edu. PL@bp.edu. That's the best way to get a hold of me.
Fantastic. Thank you. Have a beautiful World Mental Health Day, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue.
Thank you, Alina. Thank you,
Thank
Sandy.
you, Peter. Bye-bye. Thanks,
Thank
Sandy.
you. My pleasure.
Bye.